Right. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Multi-Tech Spec with myself, Danny. How are you doing today? Hope you're doing well. And today we're going to have a look at something called the VCSA, which is the vCenter Server Appliance Overview in relation with Terraform. So essentially what we're doing today is we're going to automate the provisioning of a virtual machine to ESXi through the use of VCSA, which is the vCenter Server Appliance. So what is the vCenter Server Appliance? So the vCenter Server Appliance is a Linux-based machine which runs Project Photon OS with the PostgreSQL database with some updated systems which work in relation to the vCenter. Okay? So it supports things like single sign-on, Active Directory, Open LDAP, just to name a few, and it also comes with its own web client. So why would we use this over traditional ESXi? So traditional ESXi doesn't give us the features that we need for things like automation. So we use the vCenter Service Appliance to abstract the features of the ESXi so that we can then deploy the virtual machine or do some other configuration, other types of system configuration through the use of VCSA. Okay, so that's essentially what we use it for. So how do we get vCenter Service Center? How do we get vCenter Server Appliance? You click on Product Download. You would then log in and then get the VMware vCenter Server through Downloads, and then from here it's a 10.23 gigabyte download. It does take some time to install, but that's the way that you would get that. I'm not going to go through the full installation, but I will link a video for you which goes through in a lot more detail. All you have to remember when doing the installation is that you would require your ESXi server IP, the password for your ESXi, and then you also need the password for the server as well. You will then be asked to create separate credentials for the Service Center Appliance, the vCenter Server Appliance, sorry. Okay, so once you've done that, you will also need Terraform. Okay, now the way that you can get Terraform is a simple Google search. You go Terraform, and then from here you have HashiCorp Terraform. Click on download. You will then be presented with some options, so you can download through the specific operating system that you have, Mac OS, Windows, Linux, etc. And if you're using Windows, easy way to do it is you download from here, get the binary, click Save As, save, open it up, and you will then get this little window here. Click Extract. You want to display the files. So I'm using WinRAR for this for the extraction. And to display the files in the Explorer, click OK. And from here, what you want to do is you want to copy this path. So when you have it opened up, copy the path, go down here, env. So in other words, go to the start bar, env, env, here we go, third time's the charm. Environment variables, new, not new, you want path, and then new path, and then all you have to do is copy and paste that path there, and then you just click OK. I already have it here, so I'm not going to be doing that. I'll show delete, and then you have the path to the binary essentially. On top of that, you go down to the system variables from user variables. So system variables, you've got one path, which is your user variable. And essentially what that means is that you have the ability then to use it from your user side or from within the system. That's the system variables one, which means it's global. You can use it anywhere that you wish. So you click on the system variables one, and exactly the same process. Put the directory where that binary lives from new, and then you just click OK. I already have that, so I'm not going to do that. But there you go, that's the Windows one. For Linux, it's very simple. You just literally copy and paste the commands. Uh, yeah, you copy and paste the commands and then press Y to install. Mac OS X is just brew. Okay? So once you have that, the next thing that you'll need for this process as well is an image. So an image is the ISO file which contains the operating system. So for example, Ubuntu, you can have Windows, you can have Mac, that sort of thing, right? So once you have one of those, then you have to upload it to the data store. So if you want a Windows one, like I've done, it's just a free trial from here. So you go to Windows, click on download free trial, because we're using Windows Server 2022 for this demo. Download the ISO, fill in your credentials, and once you've done that, you'll be presented with this screen here, which is to then download the ISO. Okay, so once you have that, make sure that you download the version which you require within the language that you require, and that's pretty much it for that section. Of course, once you've installed ESXi and you've installed the vSphere client, the next thing to do is to create the data center. So create data center 1, and then just create the cluster. I already have done that. I've already done this step, but I'm just giving you like the basics here. So the name as you wish, compose a new image as you wish, ESXi as you wish, and then review. So I've just kept it as default, and then I'll just create the cluster. Well, the cluster's being created, so I don't even need to create the cluster. So once that's done, then we need to add the host. That shouldn't take too long. I see it's still continuing, so I'll let it have a little think, and then we have a new cluster here. We'll add the host. So you add your ESXi server host with the username and password. I've already done this step, and what you'll end up with is the data center. Okay, so you end up with all your virtual machines and the data center there as well. Cool. So going back to the uploading the ISO file to the data store, very simply click on this image here. So this data store icon here, and I've got two. So I've got data store 1, which is inaccessible, and I've got the new data store 1, which is my new one. So why do I have one which is inaccessible? That is because I have increased the size of the disk from 500 gigs down to 4 terabytes, or I should say up to 4 terabytes. And essentially, because of that, it's looking for the old data, which is the old data store, because that's what was on the original disk, in comparison to the new data store, which is the new disk. So once you've downloaded the ISO for Windows, you can create a new folder called ISO, or if you already have a data store, perhaps on an NFS share, then you can use the location which you have, and then upload the file from there. So click on Upload Files, and then from there, for example, like I've got the VMware tools, which will become important later on. So I'd recommend downloading the VMware tools now, and we'll do that soon. So essentially, if I go back, okay, yeah. So I'd recommend downloading that one as well. So you end up with a little VMware tools icon here, which is a zip file. Extract that, and then you end up with VMware tools ISO. It won't be called VMware tools ISO. It'll be called something else with an ISO name. And then what you want to do is upload that one as well while you do this step, because it becomes very useful later on. And then from here, you just go to ISOs if you've got a folder, and then just upload here through Upload Files as mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's the prerequisites pretty much done. The next step is to then have a license, unfortunately. So this is where it gets annoying. The way to explain this is that VMware unfortunately requires a license to use the Terraform component. In other words, to use it with Terraform to expose APIs, which is unfortunate. However, don't feel discouraged because you can use the same HCL configuration in Terraform for things like Azure, GCP, XCP, and you can even use it on AWS as well. So there are different platforms that you can use for the provisioning of things like virtual machines, for things like firewalls, networking size, because Terraform allows you through a single unit of configuration called HCL files, through those HCL files, through the use of a provider, to create multiple different configurations because it's agnostic. Okay, so it's not, you don't need to be locked into VMware, for example, or XCP. You can use it on any platform that you wish and is supported. Okay, so the next step is to now go to Terraform. So let's go to what is Terraform. Let's go to that documentation. Yeah, let's go to this documentation. What is Terraform? So Terraform, as I've mentioned, is an infrastructure as code tool which allows you to define on-premises resources as well as cloud in a human-readable configuration format, right? So that's the TF files that we were talking about. As mentioned, you can do things like DNS and software as a service as well through it in terms of management. So the way that it works is that it uses the Terraform provider, which is essentially a binary which is located in the Terraform directory, and we'll go into more detail later as to what that is. And it uses that as an interface between the client machine and the machine which we want to provision. So in our case, the target API is the VMware server, which is the vCenter appliance, because that's what exposes the APIs in the first place. We write the code, which is our Terraform files. We then perform a plan and apply in order to get the desired result. In other words, the infrastructure provisioned. Hence, it's an infrastructure as code tool. Okay? So I hope that explains in a nutshell what Terraform is. And we now have it downloaded and everything, so that's good. Next part is to go to our provider setup. So our provider essentially is vSphere. And what we have to do is we have to ensure that we now have the configuration loaded. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. So if I bring my configuration now to the next screen, have it on my other screen here. So I'm just going to get this onto the correct screen. Just bear with me as it just lazily comes in, because I'm just trying to get that in the right space. And there we go. So now that's there. Right, okay. So this is what the configuration would look like in terms of a configuration file. We have a number of things here. I'm just going to get rid of some stuff which isn't needed. So plan, for example, you won't have the TF state files. I'll go through that as well. And we won't have .terraform. So I'm just going to reset this environment because I've just recorded this video for the third time now, unfortunately, due to 2 failed attempts. So that's why that's there. I'm just going to get rid of all of that stuff. There we go. That's exactly what you would have. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to save this. And essentially what we have is we have some configuration here. We have data blocks. We have a resource block and some nested blocks as well. And if you go back to our documentation, essentially what I've done is I have taken this bit of code, as I mentioned earlier, which is the provider code. So I've created a couple of files for this. The provider code here is just saying which required providers that we want. So in other words, when we run this code, what happens is Terraform and the providers themselves, they run on 2 different cycles of versioning. So you might want to pin a version to a specific provider in order to not deprecate some features. So for example, some features might be deprecated in one version, but they may be alive in another. So this is kind of the point of having that required versions there. Of course, it's customizable. You can have as many as you wish. So yeah, it's cool. Provider vSphere, this is the configuration that we use in order to configure the vSphere server, so that way it provisions our virtual machine. And it's configured with a couple of variables here. We have vSphere user, vSphere password, and vSphere server. These can be called whatever you wish because they're variables. So don't feel too discouraged if you don't have this particular configuration. You can always go back to documentation and just copy it like we've done here. Yeah, so it's just literally this part here. Okay, next up we have the vars file. So I've created a vars file called vars.tf. You can call this whatever you wish, it doesn't really matter, but I've just called it this for the time being. And in here, I've just created it with a couple of descriptions, but essentially this is just a declaration to say that those variables do exist, and this is the way in which you do so. Okay, so you have variable. This can be whatever name you wish for the variable declaration. You've got vSphere user, password, and server in this case. Okay, we've got the main code, so we have data blocks as mentioned earlier. The data blocks, what they are, is that's saying from the server, which is our ESXi/VCSA device, I know that data center exists, I know that data store exists, I know that the cluster exists, I know that the network exists, I know that the virtual machine template exists as well, okay? And these are the names which we've called it. Okay, so within this data center, there's a data store called data store 1, new cluster for the new cluster, TrueNAS DHCP, and also the templates. What we're creating is the virtual machine itself, okay? And that's what's called the resource. That's what the resource does. It creates stuff, okay? Rather than gets things. Data gets things, resource creates things. Okay, so from this configuration, we can see that we are creating Windows Server 2022 demo machine, which is the name, with the firmware of EFI. So EFI is just the extendable firmware interface, which is newer than the BIOS one, which is the basic input-output instruction set, right? So we're using that because some new ISO images, so like the one that we downloaded from Microsoft, supports this feature, and it allows us to be a little bit more secure and gives us some more flexibility. And sometimes it's required in order to boot the virtual machine. In some cases, it's not. That'll be on the BIOS one, but for us and this particular configuration, EFI is supported. Okay, then we have our disks, and from here we can see that the attributes, for example, the resource pool ID is derived from the compute cluster, and we also have things like other attributes such as guest ID and SCSI type. So the way this works in terms of syntax reading is that you have data, which is our type, and then you have vSphere compute cluster, which is defined up here, cluster as the local name. So this can be called whatever you want. This could be cluster 1, cluster 2, it doesn't matter. It's just a local name for reference. And then we have the attribute, which is our resource pool ID. Right, so we've got the number of CPUs, the memory, which is in megabytes. So this is 8,192 megabytes, which is 8 gigs. The number of CPUs, which is 8 in the system. So this is per core. And then there's also another option, which is per socket if you have multiple sockets as well. Okay, so that's multiple processors. We then have a customization section from the template, which is our computer name and our administration password, based upon what's in the template. So the admin password is based upon what you put in the template, and it should match. In my case, I've called it quite a complex password because in the previous recordings that I've done, having a simple password is not supported by the template in terms of having an administration password. It has to be slightly more complex. Interface, network interface is just saying, well, if there's a network interface on the machine through the installation of VMware tools, then we can do extra customization, such as set a static IP address, which is what I've done here, default gateway, and DNS server list is a option where we set the DNS servers in the machine. Now, you may notice that I also have another file here called tfvars, terraform.tfvars to be specific. Terraform.tfvars is a file which is a key value pair, which allows you to set the variables in terms of what they are. So for example, I've got vSphere user, right? So if I create a new file here called terraform1, as I already have terraform.tfvars, I'll call it terraform1tfvars, right, as an example, I can now set as a key the vSphere user to be test, for example, yeah, or TETST, right? The significance of this is that because there is no default value assigned to the variable, so you can do this as well. You can have default equals, you know, that, right? Because I have no default value assigned to the variable, this is a file which creates a key value pair to say that this is what the variable is, okay? So in other words, vSphere user is set to the value of TETST, okay? That's essentially what we're saying here. Okay, cool. So now that that's done, right, that file should contain the variables for the user, the password, and the server, which is related to vCenter or ESXi. So in other words, the vCenter app. All right, let me get that correct. The vCenter Server Appliance. Okay, that's what that should be. The vCenter Server Appliance. Right, so now that that's done, where did I get this configuration from? So back to the documentation at hand. Okay. If I go to the template, so in other words, we're doing it from the template version rather than a machine. What I can do is I can look for that particular resource in our documentation, and we've got two here from the vSphere provider. But I can search for this particular resource. Okay, and I should be able to find it in here. If not, we'll just do a simple Google search. So a simple Google search, and we have it right there in resources. That's the one that we want, resources. Right, so the one that I've created is via a template, and if we go down here, we can see that there's a template down here for Ubuntu. All I've done is I've just customized this template here, so feel free to copy this as your main and essentially paste it into the Terraform file, right? So what we want is we want to copy this, if I can get the entire file. Well, okay. All you want to do is just copy that, put that into your favorite editor, be it VS Code, Sublime Text, whatever you want, and then put that in here, and it will look very similar to this, right? So all you've got to do then is just update the names of these data sources, create a template as to what you want it to be. So I'm going to call my template Windows Server 2022, and then just name the virtual machine, add firmware EFI, so this one here, add that in. And then on top of that, create your customizations as you see fit down here. Provider, just copy and paste this, so this particular logic, and then variables exactly the same. So now you have the folder with the couple of files in, and there you go, that should be fine. So the next part is to essentially create the template. Right, so we uploaded that template to our data store. So what we need to do now is go back to our VCSA and go into the vSphere client mode. So the way that you do that is you literally navigate to the IP address and launch the vSphere client. There we go, got the words out in the end. And from here, what we need to do is click on the new cluster and create a new virtual machine. Create a new virtual machine. Next, data center, new cluster, data store, compatibility. So it's just literally next, and then from here, the guest OS is 2022, and normally when you select this, enable Windows virtualization base security can also be checked. That's the way I've done it in the past, so I'm going to leave it checked. Next. CPUs I can assign as 8 because I've got a fairly fast system. 8 gigs of memory. Hard disk is as you wish. And the SCSI controller can be SAS. This seems to work quite well for me, so I'm going to leave it as it is. The networking is going to be, for me, TrueNAS DHCP, and I'll get on to how that's come about in just a second. The adapter type I'm going to leave as VMNIC3. VMNIC3. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm not, because that is unnecessary. I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to go to new cluster, new virtual machine, and let's do that again. 2022, next. I'm going to call this 8 CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, and back to this part here, DHCP, click OK. You might be a bit confused as to how I got that, but just bear with me for a second. If you get stuck at this part, don't worry. New CD DVD drive. So we need this. This is actually needed. We need the data store ISO, new data store ISO, and select the ISO which you wish. In my case, that's Server Evaluation, because that's the one that's downloaded from Microsoft. Okay, connect power on, and that should be all good to go. We don't need to change the network controller, so it's on E1000E. That's fine. We can leave it as it is. That's fine. We don't need to modify that in any way. USB 3.1. I think that looks good. Controller for SATA. Oh, we don't have one, which is interesting. 3D support for graphics we could do as well, but we don't need. Let's just check other options. We don't need those as well. So next, finish. Okay, and we should have a machine here called new virtual machine, because I forgot to rename it. Of course, make sure to rename it as you wish. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename that machine to okay, we'll call it Windows Server. Windows Server 2022. Click OK, and then we're going to boot that machine on. And make sure to be quick, because otherwise you'll get that EFI timeout. So the way that we get around that is to go power, reset, yes, and then click on the remote window as quickly as you can. You may need to click into the window in order to get to the boot menu, but that's fine. So now that we're here, make sure that you install as you need. I'm just doing this as a demonstration, but essentially you can install as necessary. I don't have a pause on this, which is a little bit annoying, but this shouldn't take too long, so this should be fine. Desktop experience, for my purposes, accept next, and then we'll do that. This shouldn't take too long. Unfortunately, I don't have a pause button, which is a little bit annoying, but yeah, I'll have to edit this part out. But there we go. Shouldn't take too long though. It's on NVMe, so it should be fine. So, how was your day today? Excellent. Cool. Now, so 42%. Shouldn't take too long. Base install at 4 gigs. Just going to let that continue. Okay, let's restart that machine. While that's loading up, it will ask us for a administration password. So what we need to do is go back to our configuration, and easiest way is to have this over at this side in that window, and we want this one on this window. So that way we can type the password that we want in for the administrator. Okay, so for the admin, in my case it's M5YT4ST $. So M5YT4ST $. Finish, which will be my administrator password. Send Control-Alt-Delete. M5. Okay, there we go. That's why it's not typing. M5 YST. Nope, it's M5YT 4ST add $. There we go. Okay, cool. So now that that's up, what we want to do is immediately shut it down. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I've already downloaded the VMware ISO file. If you haven't, all you have to do at that point is go to Edge and then do a Google search for the VMware Tools ISO and then download it on here and then mount the image. So you just double click it and then install as you would. In my case, I'm not going to do that because I have it in my data store. So let's click shutdown on that. Of course, you can also mount it in a different way. There is a way that you can mount the ISO file as a guest, but that's slightly inconvenient in a way because I already have it in the data store. So I don't need the image anymore. So I might as well just mount it, mount the image, which is the VMware Tools one. Okay, so to do that, you click on the CD DVD drive arrow, and then from here, ISO file in my folder, and then VMware Tools ISO, which is what I named it. Okay, click OK, OK. Boot it back up again. Oh, this is a different machine, which is my Windows 11 test machine. Nice. And there should be, there it is. That's interesting. Let's go back for a second. That should be disabled. Okay, so make sure to power this one off, which is the Windows Server 2022 machine. And then from here, what you want to do is you want to go to Edit Settings, Data Store ISO, and I want to just double check that okay, I probably didn't put it in here. Okay, next, done, good, next, and power on. Not that one, that one. Power on. There we go, Windows Server 2022 is powering on. Alright, cool, now. Type of password in, M5YT for ST $, M5YT for ST $. Alright, cool. And from here, click on the folder icon, VMware Tools, Setup 64. Exit that. There we go. Next, complete. Next, install. Okay, and that will install all the drivers that we require. Okay, there we go. So restart the machine. Okay. And Control-Alt-Delete. And from here, what we want to do is we want to turn off the machine essentially. So M5. Make sure to click in because sometimes it does have a bit of a habit to not want to type. I think that's the right password. There we go. Cool, and we'll just shut this down. We don't need to do anything after that. Right, now what we need to do is look for our template name. And our template name is here. So all we need to do is copy it and paste it. Open this back up and we will go to here. And we want to convert this to a template. So left click, template, convert to template. Yes. And rename that template, which is Windows Server 2022, to that. Why is there underscores under here? Because for me, it's a bit easier to do than to have the spaces. But you can have spaces as well. It shouldn't be a problem. It's just easier for the computer to understand when doing string interpolation, right? Doing string interpretation, I should say. And for me, it just makes life a little bit easier when naming. Okay. Right, next. And we have that template there. So the next step is, well, why do we want to do it this way, right? So before we go into the application, I just want to give you a couple of ideas around what you could do with this. So you could create a pipeline, a CI/CD pipeline, whereby if you need to provision 500 servers tomorrow, for example, then with this solution, what you can do is you can say, right, okay, I need 500 servers tomorrow. How many do I need? Put it as a variable into your Jenkins CI/CD server, for example, and then run the code. You could have it extended through the use of Ansible to do extra configuration, for example, or you could use Packer to create a golden image, whereby you have a lot of the configuration already packed into the image. For example, the ability to join an AD domain or something of that nature. So that's kind of where you get the real power of this solution within the automation as it stands, right? So I hope that's given you a bit of an idea as to what you can do with this. And don't feel disheartened because of the license attached to this system. There are other options out there, for example, XCP and Proxmox, just to name a few. And you can also use these skills that you've learned through Terraform and Jenkins and all this sort of thing in the realm of AWS, AWS GCP, I was going to say Jenkins, AWS GCP and Azure as well as XCP. So you can do on-premises and in the cloud, okay? So don't feel too discouraged. You can use the same syntax in terms of you can use the same syntax of code in HCL or JSON to apply to the clouds or other on-premises systems supported by a provider. Right, cool. So now that we have all that down, the next thing to do is to initialize the Terraform. So in other words, we're initializing provider so that we get a folder here called .terraform, which has the provider binary inside, which communicates from our client machine to the server. And the way that we do that is by typing the command terraform init. And as you can see, we're initializing the backend. This is our local backend, which creates a .terraform folder, as mentioned. And inside of here, we can see that there's a provider called Terraform provider vSphere 251 underscore x5.exe. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And from here, what we do is we then make a plan via the Terraform plan command. And as you can see, it says that we didn't use the -out option to save the plan. So Terraform can't guarantee it's exactly what is being applied. Okay. Now we can actually apply this through the Terraform apply command, which will then give us a prompt to say yes. But if you want to do this in a more automated fashion, without any kind of interaction, what we can do is do exactly what it says and out the plan. What this means is that we are creating a binary file called, in this case, plan, or something else. So for example, it could be test, it could be whatever you wish. But the plan is a binary file which is created via Terraform. And from there, we can just apply it. So in my case, I've called it plan dash, but plan sharp, that's fine. That's not a problem. We can just say plan apply sharp. Okay, and what that will do is that will create the virtual machine for us. Okay, because we already have the template there. So I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds just to ensure that that process is taking place. And as you can see, it did exactly that. So 10 seconds has elapsed, sorry. And what happens here? So what's going on? If we go back to our VCSA, we will see that there is a server here now called Windows Server 2022 Demo, which is what we created. Now, I'm not going to touch anything at this point because the system will automatically adjust to the settings, right? So even though it's telling me to change the password, it will do it by itself. I'm not going to touch anything. Okay, in the next moments, it's going to do it for us. Right, here we go. See, restarting. VMware. Back to Windows. Back to Windows again. Starting all services, getting ready. Starting back up again is applying our configuration of the interfaces, etc. Installing our modules, and that's the system provisioned. It's just going to take a couple of minutes just to get some of the extra parts in. It should take another 20 to 25 seconds to do, but once it's reached the 2-minute mark, it should be completed. The only reason why I know that is because I've done this a few times already. So there we go. Application complete. One added. Cool. So that's our one machine now added and functional. So if we go into the administrator mode and type our password in, which was our admin password, which was down here somewhere. There we go. M5YT, our famous password. M5YT for ST dollar. M5YT for ST dollar. There we go. And if we click yes to that, and then we go down to CMD, ipconfig, there we go, 1340, exactly as our configuration has been. Right, so if we go back to our config, see, got 1340. Our gateway is correct. Our list of DNS servers should be correct as well. And the way that we check that, I think in Windows, if I remember correctly, is network. And you can see my TrueNAS server there. Change it up to properties list. And I think, there we go. 11111. So it's done exactly as it's mentioned. That configuration was done with zero intervention. Cool, so I hope you've learned something today and this video has been useful for you in terms of provisioning. It should be noted that you can do the same thing with Linux as well. There are Linux configurations, just check the documentation. But I hope you've learned something. If you like this video, like it. If you want to subscribe to this video, subscribe to it. If you want to see more, I've got more on my channel. So, yeah. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've had a fantastic session watching this video. And yeah, I hope to see you again soon. Please like and subscribe. Comment. Constructive criticism is welcome. Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.